Big Sky Howdy, and welcome back to another episode of World Bigfoot Radio. And with me today, I've got a guest who hasn't been on the show before. I'm sure you guys have probably heard him before, though. I actually was on somebody else's show where I got to kind of co-interview him the first time he was on there. And I was just recently recorded for his show. So it's like trade-off time. And now he's going to be on my show, and I'm really happy to have him. This is somebody, like I said, that you guys have probably heard of before. He's got 3 books out, if I remember correctly. And one on little people, 2 on Bigfoot. And really thrilled to have him with me. And let's welcome aboard Timothy Renner. Howdy, Timothy.
Hey, it's great to be here.
Yeah, it's great to have you, man. I don't get authors on this show very often. The last time I had one on here was Rick Sewell, and he was in the process of turning out his 2nd book on tree structures. That's much in the way of authors are on this show. So that's kind of specialized right there. You know, if you're not actually a researcher, you probably don't want a book on tree structures.
That's I think I have this book. Is it the?
You got the giant coffee table one that's all grand and glorious and cost prohibitive?
No.
Or do you have the newer one?
I guess it must be the newer one. Yeah.
It must be the newer one. Yeah, he was saying that. It's like, I'm really happy with my first book, but it's kind of pricey, so I'm going to turn out a 2nd one. People go for it. And the funny thing about this guy, he's such a non-promoter. He was on my show the 3rd time before I even found out that he actually had a book out. And I was like, this would have been something to actually mention the last 2 times that you were on. I really appreciate the fact that you're not like, pushing for book sales and everything, but, you got a book out, and you kind of should mention that. And I'm in favor of that. Let's get that out of the way first here. Tell everybody what you've got out book-wise and where they can get them.
All right. Well, easiest place is Amazon. People can get them directly from me. I'm fine with that. But Amazon's easy. I know almost everybody uses Amazon. And to be honest, the independent author split with these books from Amazon is very fair. So I don't mind. It doesn't hurt my feelings if people get them from Amazon. So
nice.
Just look up my name, Timothy Renner. All 3 of my books will come up. There's Bigfoot in Pennsylvania, which is historical accounts of Bigfoot, wild men, and so forth in Pennsylvania from the 1800s on up to the early 1900s. Then my most recent book is Bigfoot, West Coast Wild Men. It's kind of the same thing, and that's California, Oregon, and Washington State. And eventually I'm going to do the whole country, I think, one region at a time here. And then my
Except
first
for
book
Hawaii.
Yeah, exactly.
Although you could do a short follow-up book on the little people and just do the Manahuni in Hawaii.
Yeah.
I don't think anybody does that.
There'll probably be a one book at the end with a bunch of there'll be leftovers, like stuff that I found, because inevitably when I publish Pennsylvania, for instance, I'll find 5-10 reports after I publish it for Pennsylvania, like that should have gone in there.
Oh God.
So I'll do. I'm a completist. I'm real kind of crazy about that. I keep extensive files on this stuff. I'm just really obsessive about these old reports. So at the time I'm done, whenever I finish, the lower 50 or whatever it ends up being, I'll do like a leftovers book, and maybe I can plug Hawaii into that.
Cool. Yeah, to me that's really interesting. Doing a state-by-state survey is like something that's way past time for people to be doing. I had a friend who was working on historical accounts in Kentucky, and I don't know if he just kind of dropped the project or whatever, but he never put the book out. So again, some people go into this and then don't finish the job. It would have been nice. I think he had like a couple hundred reports. So
yeah, and some states simply can't. There's not enough to do a whole book on some states. I mean, I was really surprised that California, Oregon, and Washington had to be in one book, but I think it boils down to there wasn't a lot of press out there. And if you're talking about California, right, Washington, Oregon in the 1800s, there's just not as much press as there was in Pennsylvania. We had newspapers everywhere.
No,
so,
I agree with you. But the other option could be that the pack list is just really overhyped as far as how many Bigfoot there are. I'm not going to say that's what the answer is, but it could be.
Yeah, well, I mean that might be part of it as well. They have good public what do you call it, public relations or whatever when it comes to
yeah. Well, I think the main
Bigfoot
thing that cast all the light on that area was just the Patterson-Gimlin film. They had the in the 1950s, they found the big tracks where they coined the phrase Bigfoot in the newspaper, and then, what was it, like a little over 10 years later, they got the Patty footage, and then since then, everybody's had this sort of, oh, Bigfoot, that's out in the Pac West sort of thing, and most of the people in the country that even think about Bigfoot or know anything about it don't really seem to have a clue that it's not just in the Pac West. They're all over the damn place, and some other parts of the country have way more sightings than the Pac West does. I was just absolutely astounded the other day when I was looking up sightings in Oklahoma, and they've got over 1,000 in Oklahoma. Wow. You think of Oklahoma, wow, where the winds go, whipping down the plains, and there shouldn't be a pile of Bigfoot around here. They sure got enough reports on it.
Yeah. I mean, I believe it. It's some of it is figuring out too what they called them, because back in the day they didn't call them Bigfoot. So
exactly, yeah, that's a 1950s phrase. So if you're looking for stuff before then, you got to look for like Wild Man and the local names that they were calling them and stuff like that to try and find the reports on them. Because if you just do a search on Bigfoot, you're not going to find anything previous to the 1950s. Yeah,
and I've had recently someone from Colorado contacted me and they said, "Well, I can't find any of these old reports," and I said, "Well, I guarantee they're out there. You just have to figure out. You got to figure out what people call them. That's what you have to do." I hadn't done a lot on Colorado yet. I had a couple I sent them, but I'll get to
some
it.
of these. Some of these are just so regionally reported too. I mean, I'm from the upper Midwest, the head of the Great Lakes, Lake Superior, and used to live about 15 miles from Duluth. And you see old historical reports from there, but not a lot of them. And then you get things like I had Big D on the show, and he's from the Wisconsin area, and he dug up a report of troops literally fighting these things in the War of 1812. I had never heard of this before. I'd never seen it written down anywhere. He dug it up. And so, another one that I found, which was not even listed as a wild man or something, I think it was like a what is it or something like that, really old report of this logging crew that had captured this thing up by Lake of the Woods, which is even north of Minnesota. And this was in the 1780s, so back then there was like nothing there. There was nobody there. And this thing was screwing around to their logging operation. They ended up, according to the story, capturing it. And the description doesn't even match a Bigfoot. It matches a Gugly, which is even more horrifying. Wow. But again, this is like 1780s, dude. They had no idea that there was anything like this out there then, and you read the description, and it's like, oh, my God, how are they describing this thing? Because this is just exactly what they're describing. And, wow. Right down to the behavioral details and everything. So, yeah, when you're looking for these historical reports, man, it's tough because you don't know how they categorize these things. If they did a newspaper article, what they called it. And that's the only way you really got to look for it.
Yeah, and that's if you break the code, I say, and that's usually figuring out what they called it locally, like up in Seattle in the early 1900s, they were calling it Bosco because they had a wild man, a circus wild man, come through recently, and the guy called himself Bosco, and his trick or his thing he did it for the sideshow was he would eat anything, he would bite metal bars or whatever it was, and so this creature they called him Bosco, but it was definitely that's they're describing a Bigfoot, they're describing a big hairy two-legged thing that they're describing tree breaks, they're describing it attacking dogs, it's a whole checklist of things when you look at it. You go, yep. But they didn't call it a Bigfoot, they didn't call it a wild man, they called it Bosco.
Yeah, I've seen that before here out on the Pac West too, where they had a local critter that would be in an area like 15, 20 years, and they'd give it a local name, and that's all it was ever used for it. So unless you knew what their local name was, you'd never find the reports.
Yep.
And that's even still going on. I had one of my Squatchy friends talking to me about that. We were joking about different regional names for Bigfoot. And he said, yeah, the cops in Southern California call them Zoobies. So there's another weird example, and the cops are talking to each other on the intercom about this. It's a Zoobie. What the hell's a Zoobie? Well, unless you know what they're talking about, you don't know what it is.
Right. Well, this is one area in Pennsylvania. They call them, and I know there's another critter, another cryptid critter that's called a hodag elsewhere.
Oh yeah, Wisconsin.
But but for some reason they were calling them hodags, and the guy literally told me, "Well, no, we don't have Bigfoot here. We have, but there is something called a hodag. They live up in the mountains, and they're big, they walk on two legs, and they're covered with hair, and you know, and I'm like, okay, but it's not a Bigfoot. No, we don't have Bigfoot here. That's a California thing. We have the hodag. Like, all right, well, there you go.
Yeah, and another common name that you see that gets slung around the South a lot, other than booger. And somebody contacted me and they said, hey, I think I got Bigfoot activity around this new place that I bought, and they described everything that was going on. It sure sounded like Bigfoot activity. And then they got to the detail, and, you know, my house is really close to Catamount Mountain, and blah, 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 blah. And I went, wait, what was the name of that mountain again? Catamount Mountain. I'm like, do you know what a catamount is? No. Well, there's your local Bigfoot name, and they named the friggin' mountain you're living right next to after them. Hint, hint, hint.
Yeah.
So,
yep. Yeah, and I've run into catamounts as a name for them in Pennsylvania as well. It's
apparently that one's been kind of generically used all over the East Coast. So for those of you that want to look into historical archives and try and find stuff, that's a good word to use. Catamount and wild man. Over there in that part of the country, you're liable to get hits for it.
Yeah, I always tell people start with wild man because that's going to bring up the most. But unfortunately, it's also going to bring up a lot of itinerants or guys who just had long hair and a beard. And stuff. So you got to weed. You got to weed through that stuff. But you'll get stuff. You'll find stuff.
Yeah, and generally, if you read through it enough, you get the gist of what they're talking about. Is this some deranged hobo, or are they actually talking about what we're looking for? And usually you can tell from the details of the story which one it is. Sometimes it's hard to tell, but usually you can tell.
Yeah, and with my books, I always tell people, like, look, I'm throwing anything that like rings a bell for me, I'm going to throw in the book. In the end, there's probably going to be some that were people that make it in there. You be the judge. But a lot of times what we're talking about beyond the description, they may or may not describe a Bigfoot exactly, but they'll start describing behavior, and they'll say, oh, there's a guy with a long beard and hair that reached down to the ground. But then they'll start talking about how he was peeking around trees, or he was peeking in people's windows, or he was attacking people's dogs, and then you start ringing bells, and you go, okay, well now we're talking behavior, and that's become the most interesting thing to me about these historical cases. Is even more than the descriptions of the creatures, is the descriptions of the behavior, because these are reports that that we're digging up now. Not just me; a lot of people like me are digging up these historical reports, and they're matching what people are talking about today. Now, these witnesses from today aren't going back and reading these reports from the 1800s and then going, oh yeah, here's a story that talks about the pads on the bottom of the creature's feet. I'm going to talk about that, in my account, because they talk about it in this, this obscure article from 1870 or whatever it's from.
Yeah, I got news for you. People that are planning on making up a Bigfoot hoax, don't do that kind of research.
Exactly.
Because they're not trying to fool the experts. They're trying to fool Joe Average. And they're going to make sure their hoax is near where people see it, because what good is a hoax if nobody sees it?
Mm-hmm. Yeah, exactly. That's when you talk about people, oh, it's all a hoax. And, first of all, most people are lazy. Most people are really, really lazy. They're not going to go out in the middle of winter and hoax 2 miles of tracks, with a 5-foot stride somehow. Somehow they're doing 2 miles of tracks through the snow with a 5-foot stride.
That's like the report from winter before last. The guy up in South that followed the track line was following it. It went like 7 miles. That's how far he followed it anyway. And
wow.
It was middle of the winter, colder than it's colder for God's sakes. And so like a couple of weeks later, somebody came out of the woodwork and went, "Oh yeah, I'm a hoaxer. I made those tracks." Oh, interesting. Wow, how'd you make all of those tracks that have different shapes on the foot pad? Like the toes are moving and stuff. And also explain to me how you caught those 3 or 4 mice along the way, where I saw where you stopped and scooped up a mouse, and what'd you do with them?
Right.
Did you actually eat them to try and get us to believe that part of the hoax too? Because it sure looked like whatever made those tracks did.
Yeah. How did you maintain that 5-foot stride in snowshoes?
Yeah, exactly, and have flexible snowshoes so the toes would move and be in different positions on the tracks. Yeah, right.
Right. Yeah.
So a lot of times you're going to get people come out of the woodwork like that to try and claim credit to a hoax, and then there's the more sinister working for you-know-who and just want to debunk something so people quit paying attention to it. So they set up some straw man to make a bogus call and some fabricated story, and everybody goes, oh, that wasn't real. See, there's a guy that admitted he did it. Look at the details, morons. No way in hell did a human do this.
Right. And you know, that went on even back in those, I can find that back in those reports in the 1800s. Same kind of stuff. I don't think it was necessarily a government conspiracy or anything back then. I think it was, it was if you could debunk another paper, you make your paper look really good. Like, Joe Schmo over at the Times, he's reporting these crazy stories, and it's obviously just blank. Sadly, they usually come up with a really racist explanation. On the East Coast, they tend to blame it on African Americans. On the West Coast, it was blamed on Native Americans often. And
but the other even more odd ones, like the Okefenokee encounter from 1829, where it was like, in the papers, at least as far away as Indiana. It was originally reported in Midgeville, Georgia, which was the capital at the time, which tells you how friggin' far back that is. And the person, one of the 4 gentlemen of the 9 that survived the encounter, actually brought the local town recorder out to look at the body and measured it in front of him. And this was, one of the guys who supposedly survived it. I can't remember his name right off the top of my head, but his name was listed and everything. And so at that point, it's like, well, wait a minute now. This isn't coming from a local paper. This is coming from a town recorder to a local paper. So what's the justification for the town recorder to make up a story like this? Are you going to draw good attention to your tiny little town because there's a murderous monster killing people? That's counterintuitive.
Yeah. I mean, that goes on all the time. I mean, I've found reports where there was a series of what they were calling them guerrillas. Right around 1900, they start calling them guerrillas in Pennsylvania. Obviously, the discovery of the mountain gorilla, and people start seeing pictures of gorillas and stuff. Now I always say now they have something to call it. Before, they see something hairy and walking upright, they say, oh, it's a wild man. But right around 1900, they start changing over for the most part to guerrilla reports. And there's this just ongoing series of guerrilla sightings and attacks that were happening outside of Philadelphia. And this big detective from Philadelphia comes down to this town. He's going to solve it. He's going to solve the mystery. And he comes up with this story that it was an African American guy that had put phosphorus in his hair, even though there was none of the reports reported that the thing had glowing hair. But he had put phosphorus in his hair, and he was trying to scare people. For what reason, he didn't say. So he hauls this poor guy away and says, problem solved. It's all over, everybody. Nothing to see here. And of course, after that, there's about 5 or 10 more sightings, and then
more sightings. What I like is when they realize that there is such a thing as a gorilla, and they've seen pictures of it, and then everything that's like hairy and human-looking becomes suddenly a gorilla. And there's this whole flapper, I'm sure you've noticed, it's like 30, 40 years, where there's like buttloads of escaped gorillas all over the country. Even in the winter, when they couldn't possibly survive and there's no food for them, they're somehow escaped gorillas. So, it's like either we had like, 10,000 captured gorillas that we brought over from the Congo or something, and they all escaped, or that's a really bogus reason.
Yeah, well, that's the thing. There were so few gorillas in the country, and again, I know that it's just from doing this newspaper research. They were reported on like rock stars. So I think Barnum had one, and the New York Zoo might have had one, and maybe somebody in Philadelphia had one. But literally, there was like 3 gorillas in the country at this point. They were very expensive. They were super hard to care for, and they didn't know how to care for them. They didn't live long, these gorillas in captivity back then.
No, and even and think about the level of the technology at that point to go over there, try and capture one, and keep it alive all the way across the ocean back again. That was almost impossible. Not to mention the fact that once you got it here, they didn't know how the hell to care for it or what to feed it.
Yep, they really didn't. I mean, they had them, drinking beer and smoking cigars and stuff in some of these places, and it's just wow. But there simply weren't enough gorillas for all these escapes to happen. If you take the number of supposed gorilla escapes and circus train wrecks, that's another big one. My wife is a kind of a circus historian, and she makes a note of all these circus train wrecks. They did happen, but when they happened, they were extremely well documented because it was huge news if there was a circus train wreck.
Oh, God.
Like,
well, any train wreck is huge news. Even to this day, it's still huge news.
Right, yeah, exactly. And you can never find, they'll say, oh, there must have been a circus train wreck, somewhere up in Wilkes-Barre or whatever. And you can never actually find the train wreck that they're saying that these gorillas escaped from. So it doesn't add up.
What amazes me even more is they're still using these excuses, Timothy. They're still using them. I was talking to Claudia Akeley about her lawsuit out there against California, and she actually had one of the forestry people tell her it was an escaped orangutan from a nearby zoo. Are you freaking serious? Yes, they really told her that.
That was actually, I have an article in the California book where that exact excuse was used in the 1800s.
Yeah, 100 years later, and they're still using the same stupid lame excuse that nobody believed 100 years ago. Let's keep throwing that one out there. It's working good.
Yeah. This was they said an orangutan escaped a ship, and that explained it. Except the person saw two of them, and they couldn't explain how the orangutan reproduced on its own.
It was cloned.
Yeah.
The orangutans had cloning technology. I know, it gets to the point where you look at some of these reports and then you look at what kind of weird excuse they came up for what it was supposed to be, and you're like, the excuse makes less sense than it was Bigfoot. What the hell are you guys thinking?
Yeah.
It's way more far-fetched.
Ridiculous. People are reporting in the one flap in Pennsylvania, people are reporting a 7-foot-tall gorilla, which, by the way, even if it wasn't a gorilla, they don't get to be that tall. No way, no how. So they're reporting a 7-foot-tall gorilla, and then somebody catches a raccoon in a bear trap or something. It happened to be a big raccoon, and they're like, "Well, that explains it. We can. That's it. It was a raccoon."
I know y'all never seen a 7-foot-tall raccoon before, but here we go.
Yeah. I'm like, no, that does not explain it. It's just a big raccoon. And then, of course, after they say that's it, we've explained it. Of course, there's about 10 more sightings after that. So.
Yeah. And this just tickles me pink to have a raccoon actually exposed as a red herring, because you would think they'd know the difference, but apparently they don't.
Yeah, exactly. There's a kind of a smugness amongst some of the reporting too, that these are country bumpkins, they don't know anything, but they absolutely did know the difference. They would know the difference between a raccoon.
Yeah,
and
they would be the ones that actually would know the difference, because they're seeing these animals on a regular basis. The real bumpkins are the ones that live in the city and have never seen other than a cat, a dog, any animals, maybe a raccoon or a bird, and they don't know a white-tailed deer from a giraffe, and couldn't tell you the differences. They've seen them. We're supposed to believe that they know everything. But the people that actually hunt raccoons and bears on a day-to-day basis don't know it.
Yeah, exactly.
This is the same kind of anti-logic that the moron, dogmatic academia scientists used when they were going over to Africa. And we would get reports from the locals that, there's this big furry thing that looks kind of like a human, only it's bigger and meaner. And, don't get near them. They can rip you apart and da-da-da-da-da. There's no such thing. Oh, yeah, and then they capture them up.
Mm-hmm.
I guess there is such a thing. We just thought they were superstitious natives and didn't know anything because, even though we don't live around here, we know everything. What the hell kind of stupid anti-logic is that?
Yeah.
And that was just so common during the late 1800s and even early 1900s. We're the mighty, industrialized West, and we know everything, even though we've never been in this area and you've been living here for thousands of years. We'll tell you what's here. Shut up.
Mm-hmm. Yep. Yeah, and I think a lot of that kind of attitude is why you get these localized names, along with why you get people who are very hesitant to talk about it, even to today.
Yeah.
They don't want to be portrayed as some kind of bumpkin or whatever nonsense they're going to be met with for talking about it, and I don't blame them. I don't blame them.
I don't either. And the other thing is, if you need something to reference for this, just go look at any news report on mainstream media about a Bigfoot sighting.
Yep.
And there's always at least one member of the news crew whose job it is, or who just happens to be that way, to go, ha, 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 somebody saw a Bigfoot, ha, ha, ha.
Yep.
And I've actually seen a couple of news reports where I was very happy to see this, that the reporter who was reporting it seemed to think it was real. And the main newscaster was making fun of it, and you could tell the reporter was getting pissed while it was going on. That was fun to watch.
Yeah, that's still done. That was done back then. It's done back in the 1800s. Always got to throw a stupid joke in.
Yeah.
And it's still done today. If they don't joke about it, they'll mention the X-Files or something like that. You know.
Yeah, exactly.
If it's a TV report, they'll play the X-Files music or something behind it. There'll be some sort of, the way to, as they say in Britain, take the piss. Some way to not take it seriously.
Exactly. Yeah. Take the steam out of this story and discredit it right out of the gate, so that nobody takes it seriously, and they'll go, oh, look at the mainstream media reporter was saying it was funny, so it's funny and it's not real.
Yep. And it also allows them to have. It allows them to have their cake and eat it too, as well. They can wink, wink, nudge, nudge. Here we're reporting this, but at the same time, we don't believe it.
Yeah.
We're not the crazy ones.
Honestly, to give credit where it's due, I had to do a report here with the local NBC station. I know every Bigfoot researcher's worst nightmare. Mainstream media wants to talk to you. And they actually had the guy who's their main weathercaster. He was having a slow day, and when they haven't got a whole lot going on, they'll send him out to go, do extra little articles and stuff for him that they can air, to fill in things with. And we had the first Big Sky Bigfoot conference coming up, and they were actually talking about it, which is amazing because they've never talked about it since then. But they were actually doing a little bit of promoting for it, and he came and scooped me up, and I said, well, let's go up to Patty Canyon. And he kind of had that ha-ha, grin attitude about the whole thing, too, until we got up there and I started showing him some stuff and then explaining things to him. And his face got kind of white and his eyes got kind of big. And at that point, I decided that maybe he was paying attention. And he did a very straightforward and honest report on the whole thing. The only snide comment you had was from the main newscaster. And the only thing she said was, well, we got a story here about possible Bigfoot in the area. And, of course, we know there's no actual evidence that Bigfoot exists. I always got to throw that out.
Right.
But then blah, 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 blah. And the rest of it was actually straightforward news reporting, which I was very impressed. I was sitting there with the person that was throwing the convention and two of the other people that were involved, and I just managed to come in right as they were getting ready to do the newscast, so I caught it. And, honestly, I was literally standing there with my jaw open going, no way. They didn't rip on us. And I turned around and looked at them, and they're like, I know. They were just as shocked, too. It's like we were totally expecting we were just going to get barbecued, because that's every Bigfoot report on mainstream media gets barbecued. So to have them even treat it like halfway serious, we were pretty surprised by that.
Yeah.
But then again, look at the area we're in. We're in friggin' western Montana. If they make too much fun of it, the locals are going to storm the news station. You got reports out here.
To even have a halfway decent one is you got lucky. I know.
I've never seen another one that was actually that even-handed, to be honest with you. Usually there's, at least one tittering buffoon on there that's going to roast them during the whole presentation of 2 minutes or whatever that they usually give to something like that. So to have them say, well, of course there's no proof of Bigfoot, and that's as far as they went with it. And, you and me know that there's there's ridiculous amounts of proof for Bigfoot. All you got to do is go look at it. If you can actually go look at the evidence for Bigfoot for 2 months and come away saying there's no Bigfoot, wow, you're amazing, because I can't do that. There's thousands of reports. And if even one of them is accurate, Bigfoot's real.
Exactly. Yeah, we don't need every footprint to be real. We don't need every report to be real. Although I believe a lot more of them than people want. A lot of people want to toss them out.
Yeah.
That's been something I've been kind of railing against a little bit lately. I've seen a lot of people who put like cryptozoologists behind their name. These self-appointed love to say that these witness reports don't matter. That the only thing that we have is footprints and some hair or whatever, and that really irks me, because I think the witness reports, as I said, when they start talking about the same behavior over the course of 200 years, there's something to that. There's something to that.
Well, it's a giant conspiracy. After somebody made up the Bigfoot thing, they invented a time machine and sent people back in time, make all these fabricated stories with the same details. There ain't no way, folks. You know, this is like 200 years before anybody even coined the word Bigfoot. And we got reports of these things with the same description, the same behavior, everything that we're getting nowadays. Seriously, how do you explain that?
Yeah. To me, it's become so important to me to see these and to record these old behaviors that are matched up, because it's bizarre stuff. I mean, they'll talk about, you know, creatures coming out and seeing guns and recognizing them and knowing what they are. Like these, you know, reports in the 1800s where these people are saying, oh, it knew what the gun was. Like when I pointed at the gun, that's when it screamed at me, or it's you know, its eyes got real big when I pulled the gun up. You know, one way or another, they'll say that it knew what the gun was. And you know, again, this is what people are saying today. How many hunters have said that today? You know, things are fine until they shouldered the rifle. Then that's when it, you know, things got pretty aggressive.
Well, that's the thing too, you know. And even if this was some sort of a cultural folk thing that was getting passed from the local native tribes to the local white man population there, if it was an imaginary creature, it would not be the same things all the way across the continent, across hundreds of years, that keep popping up. They would have different details in their local legends about their imaginary creature, and they wouldn't match up. You wouldn't have every tribe's got a different name for the same creature, and all the descriptions are pretty much the same, and the behavior is the same, and it's, come on, seriously. Which is easier to believe, that we all made this crap up, or that they all knew about this thing before we got here and already, you know, knew exactly how it behaved and what it did.
Mm-hmm. Well, that's another, you know, it's all folklore is another dismissive. Well,
that's one of their big go-to. Yeah, that's one of their big ace cards that they like to play and pull out of their sleeve all the time. Okay, ace card playing guy, explain to me how the Seminole Indians were in communication with the Eskimos and made up the same story about the same critter with the same details.
Right. Yeah, and then the point is I have to make often is folklore and fiction are not the same thing. You know. You want to say folklore and fiction are the same thing by saying it's all folklore, but it's not the case. Folklore is there for a reason. These were teaching stories. They weren't, you know, some were myths.
Even mythology, if it was, even if it, you know, let's say it's a mythological tale about, well, make up a cryptid, something that, you know, you think is really far-fetched and couldn't possibly exist. There's still a reason for telling that story. There's some important grain of, you know, or some detail in there that makes it important enough for them to keep repeating that story. If you go back past the last 200-300 years, there is no such thing as fiction. Newsflash, there was no fiction back then. Printing was expensive. Books were expensive. In order to make a book, you had to be really sure you had an audience, and you were not writing fiction because there was no audience for it.
Yep. Absolutely.
We're lucky we've got any of this stuff in mythology and folklore from the olden days that's still been passed down to us with all this 100 years of rational hooey that they've been pushing on us, trying to disrupt all of it so that we couldn't find out anything.
Yeah. Well, and you had your in Europe you had a few monks who took interest in it and wrote the stuff down. Thankfully, you know, you had a few places. You know, the Norse were pretty good about preserving their myths, and the Irish were pretty good at preserving theirs. Luckily, there was a few Irish monks that took mercy and said, maybe I should write down some of this local stuff. But like you come to the East Coast now, unfortunately, like in Pennsylvania, our the Native American stories are, you know, they were obliterated here. You know, there's a few, but we just don't have a lot. Like, I would love to know what the Susquehannocks said about the little people, or the Albatwitch, as we call them here now, but we just don't know. We don't know. We know they had them on their shields, you know, on their war shields, but beyond that, we really don't know what their myths and stuff were, because that tribe was just, they were mostly obliterated and then absorbed into, I think, the Delawares and a couple other tribes. So we just don't know what they had to say, which is terrible. I mean, that's just sad when you think about that lost kind of knowledge.
And it sounds like they would have had some good information too, because what I've heard through the grapevine is that there's some of the Susquehanna tribe that were unusually big people, like 7 feet tall.
Yep.
And that detail doesn't get mentioned a whole lot. And you know, another good example of what you're talking about is the Micmac Indians, the Passamaquoddy and Penobscot tribes, which virtually don't exist anymore. They've all inbred with the white neighbors, so there's some white people running around with some of their bloodlines, but they kind of aren't really there anymore. And some of them apparently have passed down some of the old stories, the old, the mom and dads are telling them the same stories they heard when they were kids. So some of these stories are going around, and I did a presentation on the Gugwe, which is a name that the Micmac Confederation apparently made up. And out here in Montana, and I had a gentleman after I did the dissertation on it come up and talk to me, and he said, actually I'm from the Micmac Confederation. I've got some Penobscot blood in me, and I remember those stories from when I was a kid, Grandma telling them to me. And I said, well, what did I miss? And he goes, not much. You got it pretty much exactly the way she was telling me about it. And he gave me some even more interesting details, which is that up until the early 1900s, they'd always described this creature as sort of a giant covered with hair. And then somebody started showing them pictures of baboons. And guess what the description switched to?
Well, yeah.
Yeah, and they weren't saying it was a gorilla. They were saying it was some kind of baboon thing at that point.
Right.
So, yeah, that's pretty creepy. But again, it's like, okay, we've got this identified cryptid. We got multiple names for it. Choctaw call them face eaters. Northern Ojibwe tribes up there call them the Tuggery, which is really similar to Gugwe. But they're describing the same critter, And again, the area where the name Tuggery came from is the area I referenced at the beginning of the show with the 1780 report of them capturing one. So some of this stuff is really hard to do research on because the information on it hasn't been around for 100, 150 years,
Yeah,
so
yeah.
Even finding the name of what it was called from the local tribe, which is no guarantee they used that name in a newspaper report. They probably didn't.
Right.
It's really hard to find information on this stuff. So my heart goes out to you. I really have high esteem for the people that want to do the archive work and run around and get that kind of stuff put together. It's really tough and time consuming, but it's really great when you can find those reports.
Yeah, they're just. I mean, I'm just enchanted with them, and you'd think I get tired of them, and I really don't. My eyes will get bleary some nights just looking through newspaper articles, and for every one that I think is probably speaking about a Bigfoot creature or something similar, there's at least 20 that are just some homeless guy or some itinerant or a mountain man or something else that people were scared of for some reason, and I don't print those. I toss those out, but you got to go through them to see what they're talking about because a lot of times they'll describe, like I said, like just a naked wild man with his beard reached down to the ground or something like that, and you're like, what? And then you start getting into it, and it's like, but he was throwing stones and screaming and talking in gibberish, and it's like, okay, there's something there,
Yeah, and the other, like you're saying, the details too, because they'll be like, well, it was obviously a crazy guy that decided to go out and live in the woods, and because he went crazy and he was living in the woods, he was completely covered with hair and quit wearing clothes. Sorry, that doesn't work that way. If you go crazy and live in the woods, you don't suddenly start not wearing clothes in the middle of the winter and having lots of body hair to make up for it. That doesn't happen.
Yeah, it's like they kind of misunderstood how Darwinism worked or something. They it's right on the heels of Darwin, a lot of these reports, and they're like, well, yeah, he grew hair. He left society, and that's what happens. You grow hair all over your body. I was like, well, no, that doesn't happen.
No, that doesn't happen. And he gained about 500 pounds and a couple feet in height, too. It was amazing. No. Seriously, no.
Yeah. The other thing I fight with a lot is, people are like, well, so many reports say that they were wearing clothes. And I'm like, well, okay, yes, except, like, again, read the behavior, but also we're dealing with a very Puritan time. This is the, Victorian and Edwardian times. I'm thinking a lot of these newspaper guys, like, no matter what the report was, they threw a pair of pants on the wild man because it was just too, like, risque to print a story about a naked man running around in the woods.
I agree with you 100% because some of those stories, every detail will match up for Bigfoot except, and he had a pair of shorts on or a loincloth or something. You're like, yeah.
Exactly. Torn up pants, or something.
Yeah.
And you think, well, and sometimes I think, well, maybe they saw just like, clumps of hair in the way that a lot of reports today, people will say, somebody in a ghillie suit. Took a recent report locally of an 8-foot guy in a ghillie suit.
This guy could be making so much more money working for the World Wrestling Entertainment than he could hoaxing Bigfoot fighting.
Yeah, the 8-foot guy in a ghillie suit scaring horses, like just standing on somebody's property scaring their horses. And like, oh, okay.
Well, if you're 8 foot tall, there's not that many job opportunities. You got to make a living however you can. It doesn't cost that much to buy a monkey suit for Monkey Suits R Us. And if any of you guys know where that is, please tell me in Thinker Thunker. We still haven't found that. But yeah, I know what you're saying, because some of it's so like easily dismissed. You can read between the lines and go, well, this is the prudishness of that age coming through in the way that they're describing the story, and you can tell by the language and stuff sometimes too. It's like this is it's written very Victorian, sort of thing. So they've got that whole mindset. And by the way, before we go on any further, I'm going to give one of my friends a plug here. There is actually a group on Facebook of people that either are completely crippled or partially crippled, and most of them used to be field researchers and stuff, and they can't get out and do it anymore. And they just put together a little group of people that just do archive work. So if any of you are in that category and you're interested in that, you can join up with their group. And it's called the Group Investigating Mystery Primates, or GIMP for short. That name for a reason, because most of the members are crippled. But it's not just you, Tim. There's other people out there doing this, and there's even a group for it on Facebook. So just to let everybody know, if you're doing that sort of stuff and you're interested, somebody I know. That's what I thought too. It's like, finally somebody's got a group going on this. So if you want to join in with them and help, add to the archive information, they'd love to have you, I'm sure.
Well, I'm in the field as well as staring at the newspapers, but that's an awesome thing. That group sounds awesome. Like, if you can't get out in the field, what an awesome way. You're still interested in the topic. That's an awesome thing.
You know people just like I do that are 30, 40, 50 years out in the field. Now they're just too crippled to do it anymore, but they still got that fascination with Bigfoot. And the only thing they can do is sit around and play on the computer. I got a guest that's been on my show a couple of times, basically in a wheelchair most of the time, and that's what he does. Because he can't go out and really do anything in the field or go hunting or anything anymore. He just sits there and surfs the web and goes and looks at old newspaper articles and tries to find interesting stuff about the state he lives in. So we need more of that. We need more people that are doing that. I don't do hardly any of that. I did a lot of archive work for, quite a few years until it got to the point where the cyber age started putting all this stuff up, current reports especially, easier to find than trying to surf through all of the newspaper articles and dig out what's coming out. So that's making things a lot easier. But, still there's this, I think we probably haven't even discovered a third of the reports that are in the old newspapers yet. So there's still plenty of stuff out there for people that want to go look into it. Go to your local little dinky, newspaper and go check their microfiche. Go, look at what they've got from the old reports and stuff. You'd be surprised.
Yeah, because even like the online newspaper archives, they don't have everything, especially these little local papers, and that's where a lot of the gems are, in the local papers.
Yeah, they came out in the local papers, and it was just so wild or far-fetched or something that nobody else ever picked it up, and that's as far as it went, just the local paper.
And you can find some great stuff in those. I love when I can get to. But that's why another reason the Pennsylvania book was thicker, because I could get to these little local historic societies, which have these, they'll have some paper that only existed for 10 years, between 1880 and 1890 or whatever.
Oh God!
And you can dig through and find stuff in there that's just not on these, these online archives and stuff. It's fantastic.
And that's a perfect example of how tough it is to find some of this stuff. Tim just nailed it. There's this teeny little newspaper that existed for 10 years. You think that's on the internet? Hell no.
No.
You got to be Joe Local. Let's go dig and find it, or you're just never going to see it.
Yeah. So no, that group is I fully support that. That's an awesome thing. I'm glad to hear about that, because that's what a great thing for if you can't get out in the field. That's fantastic.
And one of my friends that is completely crippled is the main man running it. He's the admin there. And he's a really good guy. He's also admin on a bunch of other Bigfoot groups. And so 100% confidence in this gentleman running the group investigating mystery primates, GIMP. So go on, check it out if you guys are interested in that. They want your help, and they would love to have you there. Go check it out. But, hey, before we go sidetrack any more, we should get back to how did you get interested in Bigfoot? What got you into this and the whole thing?
We kind of did the leapfrog right into the historical stuff. I when I was a kid, I loved it. Like, I grew up in the golden age of Bigfoot, you know, so the Patty film had just come out, and In Search Of was on TV.
I love that show.
You know, Legend of Boggy Creek came out,
Yep.
which I watched that recently. I still like that movie. I mean, there's some goofy moments to it, but you know, it was based on witness stuff. You know what I mean? So
yeah. And the best part of
there's
that movie is they had some of the people actually involved playing the parts of themselves, which is cooler.
Yeah, it's just I mean, it's of the time, and it's super low budget and everything, but you know, there's a reason why it's a classic. I think it's really well done. You know, kind of not special effects wise, but just the story wise, it's just a neat little kind of
very atmospheric cinematography, and you know, like kind of banjo and forlorn folk songs and stuff that they're playing in the background while they're showing you the scary sulfur or whatever. And that whole, it's just creepy. I mean, even though it's like a B movie and it's, you know, old aging video at this point and everything, the way they put it together, it just makes the hair on the back of your neck stand up. It's really well done.
Yeah. It's kind of predates the whole small town monsters thing by what, you know, however many years, 40 years or so. And you know, it's kind of that same formula, though. That let's take these local legends and get them down, get them on film, and get the people talking about them.
Yeah, right. And again, that's documentation. It may be a weird form of documentation. It's a modern form of documentation, but thank God somebody's trying to document it. And talk about great timing. They showed up and did this when all the witnesses were still alive, and some of them wanted to play the part of themselves in the movie. Wow.
Yep.
When else has that happened?
Right. Yeah. Yeah, it was, and yeah, it's just so that movie was big for me, you know, growing up, and then I was real into it, and you know, there weren't many books, at least in my local school library. I think there was one book on Bigfoot that I got out constantly when I was a kid, just constantly. I think I would just renew it, go in and renew it, go in and renew it, go in and renew it, but you know, I kind of faded from it when I became a teenager, got interested in girls and, you know, punk rock and everything else, and that gets teenagers distracted and just kind of forgot about it. And then as an adult, I did just an internet search one time. I was like, oh, I wonder what's going on with that. And of course, you know, that brought up a load of information, and vaguely got interested. I was like, okay, this is pretty neat. And it was really when I wrote my first book, which was it's called Beyond the Seventh Gate, and it's about a local legend that was attributed to a ghost story. And the more I poked into it, the more it started sounding like cryptids and not ghosts to me. Like, what people were reporting were things peeking from behind trees, things screaming at them, eye shine, you know, being paced in the woods. Just, you know, if you know anything about Bigfoot reports, it's like, this does not sound like ghosts. This sounds like Bigfoot. And indeed, I ended up finding a guy who was attacked in the area by a creature, and then started digging a little deeper. I was like, well, maybe there's more sightings around this area. Yeah, I was believing the propaganda that Bigfoot was on the West Coast at this point.
Right.
I figured there'd be a few sightings around here. And I'm in York County, Pennsylvania, so it's kind of south central. And you know, I'd heard of a few, but I really wasn't expecting to find that many. And then when I started digging and started finding sighting after sighting after sighting, I went, oh, okay, there's something to this, and that really kind of fired me up, and I jumped in with both feet about the time I started writing that book. So it's I've had a good interest in it for a long time, but I really kind of jumped in with both feet in the past, I want to say, 5-6 years. So
nice. Yeah, it's it's an eye opener when you start finding local reports. It's one thing when it's all, that's way over there in the Pac West on the far side of the country, and I don't have to worry about that. And then you run into a local hunter that said, well, I saw this damn thing a couple of years ago, and I ain't hunting anymore. And you're like, hold on a minute, what did you see?
Yeah.
And then you start getting more reports and more reports and more reports. And the one hunter saw one that was like, reddish hair with brindle tips on it or something. And then you get the same description from another hunter that doesn't know the other guy. And you're like, okay, what's going on here?
Yeah. The other thing I was thinking, like, and this is, I've heard, a lot of people say this. And it really, until I heard other people start saying it, in fact, I heard you say it somewhere. I don't know if it was on your show or on Sasquatch Chronicles. I started getting more comfortable saying it, that probably the biggest surprise for me was how close these things come to towns and to residences and residential areas. I was expecting I'm going to be, 50 miles out in the middle of the woods, all the time trying to, look for this stuff. And the evidence, I find more evidence closer to people than anyone probably would be more comfortable, very comfortable thinking about.
I know, and when you first find that out, it's creepy as hell, and I actually talked to Bear extensively about that, and he said, that kind of threw me too, but when you think about it, it makes sense because they're opportunists. And if they can stand to be near humans, they can make out pretty good living near us because it makes more food sources available to them. Not only the direct ones, the crops that we're growing and everything, the peripheral ones. We're growing crops, so animals want to eat crops, so they're eating the crops. Oh, that's something for them to eat too, the animals that are eating the crops. And, you're absolutely right. I was really surprised when I got here to Missoula and started looking around the local area. And one of my favorite spots to go research right now is Patty Canyon. I've turned out a bunch of videos on it. And the area that the Bigfoot are in that I keep finding tree structures in is 3 miles from town. 3 friggin' miles from a town of 75,000. Oh, my God. Wow. And it's in a recreation area. It's daytime use. You can't hunt there. There hasn't been hunting there in 80 years. You can't even have a pellet gun there. That's interesting. And but we keep finding remains of dead animals around it, like deer and elk and stuff. What's killing them and leaving their bones lying around there? And you can't be up there after dark. You can't camp there. You can't be out there after dark. And you can't be back there until the sun comes up again. Again, interesting. And this 30 or 40,000 acre little recreation area happens to border a 2 million acre national forest. So, no, again, you're absolutely right. And I think really my opinion on this whole thing, just based on all the information that I've gathered, is that the ones that, and I think it's mostly the type 1s, will actually live closer to humans because A, we're entertaining, and B, they can, make more of a decent living off of the peripheral food that we're making available to them. And that the other types that are living further out in the sticks are the ones you want to avoid. They're out there for a reason. They don't like us. They don't want us around. They're potentially dangerous because they don't like us and want us around. They haven't got much patience. They tend to be more aggressive. Those are the ones to avoid. If they're near humans and you haven't heard like a bunch of missing person reports, they're probably not dangerous.
That's actually a good way of looking at it. Yeah.
And I'm not gonna say if they're living near humans they're safe. No, because I know somebody who's like down in Arizona that knows for a fact it's an area sort of like what I'm just describing. It's a day use recreation area, and women are disappearing from it, and they don't have any reason to believe that it's some crazed rapist or something that's doing this. And in fact, there's I think one was like a group of 2 women or 3 women or something that all disappeared at the same time. That kind of makes it tough for a kidnapper. But, she went and told the local rangers, here's what I think it is, and they laughed at her, and she went, okay, well, I told you. I did my part, and that's it.
I took a report that was in a residential neighborhood, and I'm thinking, no way, right? So I'm just like how did this happen? And come to find out, I'm doing a Google satellite looking at the area, and darn if this thing wasn't. There's a highway of trees basically that goes from the river across, through some farmland and so forth. Basically, the highway ends in these people's backyards, and they also happen to have a whole lot of fruit trees growing in their backyard. And there was a little girl who reported it. She didn't report it, her parents reported it, but she saw this thing, started screaming. So there's a monster in the backyard. Ran in the house. Now this family had no knowledge of Bigfoot. They're actually an Asian family, and they knew nothing about Bigfoot at all. And they contacted us, and they wanted to know, like, what this was. And we went out, and, of course, all the fruit on the backside of those trees is completely gone. Everything that was facing the woods was eaten. And they said, like, oh, our garden's getting raided and this and that. And so, we found a maybe footprint there. It wasn't anything that was super convincing, but what we did find was an area where something had been hunkered down, and there was a sort of a ditch right behind their house, and right at the end of these woods that you could get in that ditch and just sit there. It could be broad daylight, and no one would ever see you. It was, it was just a perfect place to hide and to sit there and watch anybody playing in the backyard. And that became very creepy. That was just, because she was, I think 4 or 5 years old.
Oh God, yeah, I know. Their interest in human children scares the crap out of me, and you hear it over and over and over again. And it goes back to the old Indian legends too. Mm-hmm. But the thing you just referenced, the ditches and stuff, I hear this over and over and over again from Brenda and Caveman down in the Four Corners area. And you think about that area, it's like, well, if you're up in the mountains, there's some trees, but other than that, there's nothing. It's flat, wide open. How are they getting around? That's exactly how they're getting around. They're following the rivers and the washes and the draining ditches at night, and they can stay ducked down. You can't see them, and that's when they move around. Yeah.
Yeah, I'm pretty sure because I mean we have expanses of woods here, and I think they use the creek beds. And if you look at where the reports are, I'm pretty sure they're using the creek beds as kind of their roads and the rivers as their highways.
Yep.
And getting back and forth to these areas, because all of these areas are connected either by the river. The Susquehanna River runs kind of right on one side of the county here. They'll either be connected by the river or you can follow these creek beds, from the river to these different areas.
And they do that all over the country. That's something I've heard over and over and over again. That's their highways. The little rivers, the streams, the big rivers, that's their highways. That's how they get from point A to point B and find their way there. They follow these. And most of these, if you think about it, if there's water there, that means there's trees growing next to it because there's water for them. And so there's cover there. Plus, they've always got water along their travel route when they want to get a drink. And I got even more specific information from one of the local natives up here. I was asking him about, granted, we're living in the Rocky Mountains. It's not the Muddy Mountains. You're not going to find tracks very often. You do find some tracks around rivers and stuff, and I know they use rivers for travel corridors, so that doesn't surprise me very much. And I said, but how do the big ones avoid people seeing them? And he said, they use the rivers for a highway. And I said, well, yeah, I know they walk along the rivers. And he goes, no, they walk in the river. They walk in the river, and they go in and out where there's rock, where you can't see a track. And as tall as they are and the distance they can move, easy for them to couple 20, 30 miles down the middle of a friggin' river at night. And you never know they're there because there's no tracks.
Yep. Yeah, they look like a log floating in the river or something. That's,
Well, I mean, with these guys, if you're talking about a 10-footer or something, if the water ain't at least up to 5 feet tall, he's waiting.
Right.
He could be walking along the shallower part of the river and close to the bank, and by the time the sun comes up, whatever indentations he left in the river bottom are washed away. There's never going to be a track there. And they're old and smart enough that they're not going to leave the track going in or out. So, that's usually, if you're finding tracks, it's the smaller, dumber ones that are leaving them. You don't find a lot of giant tracks. I've only found just a handful of tracks over 18 inches, 19-incher and a 21-incher. But mostly they're in the 16, 17-inch range, which, again, is the, teenagers, basically, and put in Bigfoot terms. It's still prone to make dumb mistakes and leave tracks occasionally.
Right, yeah. Well, that seems to be, I think we were talking about this one when you came on my show. That seems to be, that when people report them coming up to their house and stuff, those seem to be like the 8-foot ones, and smaller, 6 and 8 foot range. It's not like the giants, usually.
Yeah. Well, if let's put it this way: if it is a really big one coming up to your house, you should probably be worried.
Oh, yeah.
Because they won't let you see them unless there's a real specific reason for it. And they don't make stupid mistakes usually. So if if there's some 10-footer standing outside your window peeking in, let's just hope he doesn't do that again. If he does do that again, there might be an issue.
Yes.
But that's part of the fun of the whole thing. We got this cryptid critter that we just don't know that much about, and we have to. And here's why people shouldn't discount witness sightings, because this is where we get most of our information from. If one witness says something, no big deal. But if you got 50 witnesses telling you the same thing, there's a pattern there. They can't all be making up the same weird detail.
I agree 100%. I think I think witness testimony is incredibly important, and sure, you can throw some out. Some people are crazy, fine. Okay, some people are crazy. Some people are lying, fine. Some people are lying. But like you said, when you start getting 50 reports where they're reporting pretty much exactly the same thing or variants thereof, like, okay, come on. These 50 people get together. Was there a convention, a hoaxing convention? They decided to get together and.
My favorite hoaxing mega theory.